The episode archive of Your Creative Push is now easier than ever to navigate. Head to yourcreativepush.com and click episodes at the top. There you'll see all the episodes listed by date and by genre. Every episode of YCP is meant to inspire you, regardless of your creative passion, but you can now easily find the ones that fit your creative medium when you need a little extra push. Your Creative Push, episode 234.
You're making decisions that bring you closer to that final goal, and it's one little tiny step at a time, and one day you wake up and be like, oh my god, I'm actually an artist now.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Daniel Phillips. Joel is a talented artist whose work focuses on very large-scale charcoal portraiture, which explores the social structures in his immediate surroundings. If you've seen his work before, you know that he does portraits of the homeless people in his neighborhood, or at least that's what he's most known for. But the interview started out with a bang, talking about how that started for him, and it was really fascinating to see how he did that, and also kind of scary to hear about the idea of actually approaching these people. And like you'll hear him say, that is still one of the scariest parts of the entire process. But we also talk about the process after that, of speaking with them, of photographing the potential subjects and choosing which ones he draws. And then after they're done, after the many hours it takes him to complete the pieces, to try to track those people down so that they can see them. We also talked about his definition of a successful portrait and why he draws in such a large scale and the experience that he wants to give to the viewer. And we also got pretty deep talking about the creative process and how he gets through what he calls the middle junk. And perhaps one of the most interesting things we talked about was towards the end, when we talk about his upcoming show and this big transition that he's making in his career, and some of the fears that have held him back from making this transition, and some of the fears that he still has as he's creating this new body of work, all of which is not portraits, the thing that has kind of been his staple for so long. Just a really unique artist, a unique story, and this is one of the interviews that I was really anticipating, and he did not disappoint. So without further ado, here it is, my interview with Daniel Phillips. Joel, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you very much for being here, man. I appreciate it. I was wondering, maybe you could start out by telling us the story of how you started drawing these portraits for the first time of these people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just graduated college, and actually I didn't even study art. I studied graphic design, and so I was moving to San Francisco for a graphic design job, and I found these guys on Craigslist who were building out a live work under the radar. It was an art space. It was in an old sewing factory, actually, that wasn't even zoned for living. And I met these guys over the internet and actually Skyped with them, but I didn't even meet them in person before I sent them money via the internet, which is I tell people not to do. But in this case, it worked out. And then I moved across the country. I moved from Santa Barbara, so I went back up to Seattle to pick up some stuff from my parents' house where I grew up, and then drove down in a budget truck to San Francisco. It turned out that the neighborhood that I moved to was a pretty rough neighborhood. I had no idea what it was going to be like, and it turned out to be actually, from a crime standpoint, at the time, the most crime-ridden corner in the city. I remember parking my budget truck in the back alley and hearing heroin syringes popping under the tires, and just kind of being like, "Oh my God! What have I gotten myself into here?" And the series of drawings started out as my way of trying to understand this neighborhood that was a very foreign space, and that was honestly a bit terrifying, as a new, addition to that community. It was a corner that kind of had every sort of visible social ill that comes with a larger metropolitan space, whether that's, everything from homelessness to drug addiction, prostitution. I never really got into any super scary situations, but somebody tried to mug me at one point on my back door. I mean, it was a rough neighborhood. And I fell in love with these people as soon as I started making these portraits. It started out, like I said, as my way of trying to understand my neighborhood, and it very quickly became about the sort of people that we don't know how to deal with in society. And yeah, it's been now 5 years of me making these portraits. I think I've done more than 100 of them.
Wow.
And it's grown and transitioned. This hasn't, I don't live on that corner anymore. But it became the focus of a very long, intensive project that I probably spent more than 15,000 hours of drawing, focused on these neighbors. And I made some really amazing friends, and the drawings became my ticket into a community that, was very wary of me as, very much as a gentrifying force. It was, they were rightfully wary of me approaching, their communal space. And through the drawings, I became really good friends with a lot of people who lived there. Wow.
15,000 hours. So you're an expert and a half?
Yeah, according to Malcolm Gladwell, I'm 1.5 geniuses.
Very cool. Well, so can you take us back to like the first time you like kind of decided to make one of these portraits? Like how did you approach that person? And like, and then from going forward, did you have like a strategy of like how you kind of approach them? Cause like for me, I know, like I kind of harken back to my dating days and like walking up to a girl in the bar, and it was like the most terrifying thing in the world. And I think this is even more terrifying because that person doesn't know like what you're up to or what you're trying, like what you're actually trying to achieve. So what was that like?
Honestly, the part of the process where I walk up to a random person and meet them is my least favorite part of the process. It's an incredibly emotionally vulnerable space, like you said, to walk up to somebody you've never met and say, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm going to try to convince you right now to give me the time of day." And I think the first time I did, I'm trying to remember who. I know who the first set of drawings were. I can't remember who the first person I met was. But I found very quickly that once I got past that initial awkwardness, and once I convinced someone that I wasn't in this to exploit them, it became something that people were just excited to tell their stories. I mean, this whole project, was about the sort of people that we overlook in society. And so a lot of my subjects are people who don't get the opportunity to tell their stories and to feel like valuable members of society very often. They're people who we don't make eye contact with when we walk by in the street. And so someone approaching them, they're willing to take a chance on that person, often if that person is willing to, listen to what they have to say.
Right.
So for me, that first time, it's never gotten easier. Like I've done this hundreds of times now, but it's always terrifying. And there's always this, I think rightfully suspicious moment from, some of my subjects who are like, okay, what do you want this for? What are you doing with this? What are you getting out of this? Because in San Francisco, poverty and homelessness are very visible, and disaster porn is a thing. People who are in those circumstances are very aware of the fact that someone might be interested only in consuming their poverty rather than actually understanding who they are. And most of my subjects have talked about like, the time that some guy for a newspaper took pictures of them, and then they didn't ever see the pictures, or they end up in the newspaper without their permission, or all of these strange circumstances where they have been consumed by, people who are interested in kind of, I guess, consuming their pain. So it's a tough balance, but it was very much something that the more drawings I did, the first few were tough because everyone, like I said, was a bit suspicious. Once I'd done a handful of drawings, people then realized like, oh yeah, you're that guy who draws people. And it was a pretty tight community, and they all knew each other and knew, oh, you drew Spaceman. Awesome. I'd love to be drawn. And after a handful of drawings, it actually transitioned to where people are asking me rather than the other way around.
So I guess the idea there is like you're straight up with them and you're telling them exactly what your goal is. And
yeah.
I also love that idea of, I think that applies to anybody doing anything. It's like you have to, even me building this podcast, it's like the first people I reached out to, it was like, oh, I have this like weird idea to create a podcast about creativity. And then it's like hard to get people to jump on board. But then once you have like a body of work and something to kind of reference back to and show people, then more people are much more willing to come on board with just a simple like ask,
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. And I actually had this really amazing opportunity. I think I'd been doing this series of drawings for like 6 months at this point when the city of San Francisco started this program where they would take old empty storefronts and hand them over to artists until they were leased out. And they would hang art in them. And so I actually was able to hang some of the original drawings in a storefront window on the same street corner where I was meeting all of my subjects. And so it was just this amazing experience where I got to watch people celebrate members of their community within their community. And then also for me, where I could say, oh, what do I do? That's what I do. And just like point, and they'd be like, oh, you want to draw me like that? Awesome. And so that was probably the turning point where the project went from being like, I'd met a handful of people and, was kind of starting to gain traction to people being like, oh yeah, I know what you do. And that was pretty cool because it really enabled people to be celebrated within their own communal space.
That's so great. I love that. So then you go out and meet them almost like a journalist and you get their story, and then do you take photographs as reference and then draw it later, obviously?
Yeah, I work from photo references, so I shoot a handful of photos. It's almost always the first photograph that I shoot that's the one that I work from.
Interesting.
But yeah, I'll shoot a handful of photographs and, spend as much time with them as they or I have to give in that particular moment, which will be anywhere from, 5 or 10 minutes to an hour or two, and then bring those back to my studio and spend hundreds of hours drawing.
And is every person that you meet going to definitely have a portrait of them? Or like, are there some that you're like, all right, this isn't going to work out. Like maybe I'm not the person to draw their portrait because I don't really grasp their entire story. Or is it just like, no matter what, like when you talk to them, they get a portrait?
It's more the former because, sometimes an interaction goes really well and sometimes it's the image that I get out of that interaction. The reference image doesn't quite capture what I want it to. And, sometimes, it tends to be fairly intuitive for me where I will see somebody and say, oh my God, I have to draw that person. But because I'm, as a realist, I'm very dependent on the information, that I'm responding to with the camera. If that moment isn't quite the way I want it to be, sometimes I'll take a step back and say, all right, well, hopefully I see them again, or, but this is not what I want this piece to be. It doesn't quite capture who they are, or doesn't quite, get what I want to get out of it. It's hard because I wish I could say like every single person I photographed, when I'm talking to people on the street, they always like, oh, you're going to draw me. And I'm like, I want to draw you. I can never quite promise that will happen. I'll photograph hundreds of people and make a drawing of, half of those. And generally at some point, if the reference is what I want it to be, it'll eventually become a drawing. Sometimes it'll be even a couple of years before that happens, but.
And then do all of them see a finished piece, or like, do you ever seek them out?
If possible, yeah. I mean, that's been one of the hardest things, I think, actually, about this body of work is that many of my subjects are transitory and do not have a fixed address and do not have a cell phone or a way of contacting them. And so when I initially lived and worked on this street corner, that was less of an issue because I would just bump into people when they were around. Now that I don't live there any longer, it's been much harder to keep track of people because I just don't have a way to get a hold of them. So whenever I can, I show people the finished portrait and give them prints of that portrait as well. But that's something that is, especially currently I'm actually on a residency program in Oklahoma, so I'm not even in the state of California. So I feel very disconnected from that. It's something I wish I could do more easily, but, it's kind of up to the luck of, did I bump into this person on the street, and I've had moments where it had been 2 years since I finished a drawing and I hadn't seen the person. And then on the other side of the city, I run into them and it's like, oh my God, you remember when I approached you? And then pull my phone out and show them the piece. And it's always a really amazing experience to have that happen, to see somebody respond to, because I think most people don't, no matter your social standing or how much money you have or whatever, you don't have that experience of being drawn in this like crazy old school sort of like, it's a really, I think, a unique experience to be on the other end of that, and people seem to really respond to it. So,
absolutely, it's a huge gift to have like somebody to be able to kind of look into your soul or like kind of spend that time with you. And really, I mean, you end up spending more time with them than they spend with you because you spend so many hours doing these really hyper realistic, portraits. So, I mean, it's like you have this probably even a bigger connection to them than they do to you. So it's like a gift that you're giving to them, that your time and your talent.
It's funny. I actually kind of constantly have to remind myself that they don't know me as well as I think I know them, because I have spent like this intense amount of time just with them alone, with this one person. And I'll feel like after I finish a portrait that I know this person really well, especially if I feel like the portrait is, if it's a successful piece, like I'll feel like I really know them. And then I'll run into this person again and be like, oh, I feel like I have this like really deep connection. And they're like, for them, if that first interaction I had was pretty short, like they're like, oh, who are you again? I'm like, I just
slow down, buddy.
Yeah, totally. Like
it's only our first date.
Yeah, exactly. We're not getting married yet. Yeah, it's pretty funny, but it's always a beautiful interaction, and that kind of gets at the root of, for me, why I make the portraits, is this process of observation. It's a way of seeing, the seeing through the tip of my pencil, and for me, the drawing is primarily an act of observation, and it's almost less about the finished product than it is about the process of seeing while I'm creating it. And I really do feel like when I finish a piece that I have a sense of someone that's kind of magical, because I didn't actually get it through interactions with them physically, but by recreating them, in this two-dimensional space. So
what would you say is like a true portrait to you?
A true portrait just in general, or?
Yeah, because I know that like you spend so much time, like for you, it's much more about telling the story in that person's face or their body and trying to kind of portray their being, as we've kind of talked about before. Yeah. So like what is it about portraits to you that is so significant?
I think it's funny, there's like this kind of dual nature to it, because as an artist, I'm working for myself, but I'm also thinking about my audience. And so there's a sense of like what a portrait should be for a viewer, and there's also a sense of what I want a portrait to be for myself as I'm creating it. And for me, like I said, that process of capturing someone and recreating them and understanding them and observing them in this really, methodical but also very intimate way. But then for my viewer, there's this whole second level of that, where this is someone that they've, likely never seen before. And so a successful portrait really captures, something more than just a physical sense of someone, but captures a narrative and captures an emotional sense of them. And so I always feel like a successful portrait actually has more than one emotion. That's one of the main things I search for, is portraying a multitude of emotions, and even conflicting emotions. People, when they're being honest, often have, it's not just a smile. Part of the reason I think that I'm so interested in these particular subjects is that they are very willing to be vulnerable. And I think that comes out of a place of, a bad place. It's a place of social vulnerability and kind of being at the bottom end of a social ladder. A lot of my subjects don't care too much about how society views them, because they've been so abused by society. They're kind of in this place of like not giving two fucks anymore.
Right.
And so there's a deep honesty in the way that they stand and the way that they show themselves, and whatever emotion they're feeling at any given moment is something that they're willing to convey, because they're not forcing themselves into some sort of societal mold in the way that a lot of people might be. And I think a lot about how, we're a society that understands image making, and we're very aware of how we project ourselves to a camera. Like if I approached you on the street and I said, hey, I'm an artist, I want to draw you. If you said yes, you would then project how you want to be perceived. You would shape yourself to how you want it to be seen, from the camera standpoint and the viewer standpoint. And what I'm searching for in a portrait is someone who's more vulnerable than that, who's willing to show a deeper layer and a deeper level of themselves and a more honest vulnerability. And so for me, a successful portrait is one that shows that deeper vulnerability.
I love that. And I think that all creative people can kind of really learn a lesson from your subjects too, because it's so hard as a creative person. And I think that that's what makes a successful creative person is when you're able to shed all of those guards that you have up, and to not give two fucks, like you said, like about what other people think about you, and to just like try to like tell your story honestly, or tell what you want to put out there, as opposed to kind of putting up this false front. I think that's something that any creative person, regardless of what you do, if you're a writer, photographer, painter, musician, just getting yourself out there in the most vulnerable way is like the key, I think, to being a successful creative person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I even have a hard time saying that about my subjects, because I realize that it comes from this place of like deep social vulnerability, where
Right.
that's a result of, of very intense and potentially painful experiences that they've had. But there's something that I also deeply admire. A lot of my subjects are people that have, I don't want to say chosen, because I actually feel like that's one of the main stigmas I'm battling in this body of work, is that, like, for example, a homeless person has chosen to be homeless. But there is a sense that these are the sort of people that are deeply honest in a way that most people in society aren't, and they aren't willing to do things that will, go against that. And that means that they, freedom is like a really important thing, and being who they are is a really important thing. And many of my subjects are some of the most deeply honest people I've ever met, and that's I think a lesson that we can all learn from.
Absolutely. And your portraits are pretty big too. So why is it important for you to have such a large canvas?
That's something I started out, actually, when I first started drawing. I started out making 1-to-1 scale portraits, and I just fell in love with it. There's something about the process of creating someone at a life-size, scale for me, but primarily that's actually for the viewer, in the sense that I don't want these to be art objects. I want them to be people. And it's actually like the same reason I don't frame things for shows is I want someone to walk into a room and to be in a room with my subjects. And so having that 1-to-1 scale, I think, forces people to interact with the drawings in a very different way than they would if they were little tiny digestible, portrait objects. They kind of have to come face to face with these people in a very physical way. And yeah, it's really important to the whole process.
And do you ever find yourself like regretting that decision that you made, like to work in such large scale, or to make yourself kind of known for drawing in such large scale as you're, how many hours does each one take, would you say?
I would say the average would be between 50 and 100 hours.
So you're ever on like hour 45, 50,
Yeah.
like you're like, oh
Yeah.
God, why?
Yeah, I always joke with people where I'm like, the first couple hours of drawing a piece, I'm like ecstatic, because I'm so excited about the possibilities that this piece has. And the middle 50 to 75% of that drawing process is just, it's like walking up a hill that you can't see the summit on. You're just like taking one step at a time. And then the last day or two, when I can see the end in sight and I realize what this process has created, is then again exciting. But the middle junk, I'm always questioning, why are you doing this?
Right. Well, would you have any advice then for people? Because I think that applies to a lot of people, that middle junk where it's like still trying to kind of work things out, and it's like, am I going to get through this, or am I going to be able to figure everything out? And then that ecstaticness that comes, I don't know if ecstaticness is a word, but that joy that comes like towards the end as you're finishing it up, and it's like so much easier to get back to work then, like you have that kind of drive to get to it. So would you have any advice for people to get through that middle junk?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. I had a conversation a couple of years ago with another artist, and we were talking about the two driving forces behind any sort of creative career. And one of the driving forces is one that a lot of artists talk about, which is creative passion, and that is what I would kind of see as, the initial impulse to make the piece, the first few hours, and then that final ecstasy as you're finishing the piece. But the middle section, it is, I think, shaped by the second creative force, which is, for me, I see it as, ambition, or at least just, it's not passion, it's more of a ethic, or a work ethic, or a drive of saying, like, it's not always fun. And you have to have more than just that, oh, this part of the process is fun, to make work over the long run. And if you don't have that, things will fall flat. Like, you won't finish shit. And so for me, remembering that this is a career and this is something that I take very seriously is how I do that. I love the drawing process, and it's not as if every single day or the majority of the time I'm not having fun, but it's not also as if I'm having fun, the whole time. And remembering that this is not, I'm not doing this only for the fun of it. I'm doing this because I'm trying to build something larger and more important than this momentary, joy or not. And so wading through that middle section, I think, is what's key for me, is just remembering the long-term goals and what I'm trying to get out of it, and treating it like a job, showing up every day and putting in the time.
Exactly. Yeah, I think to get through that middle junk, like to get through that, the second part, that ambition, is to have that big goal in mind. And I think also a way to help you through that is to create stuff, to like have a habit of creating stuff, to have many successful or finished pieces done, so that you kind of are used to that process. You're used to that gross feeling in the middle, to get yourself through that, to just remember all those other times where you had that same exact feeling and it ended up being great at the end.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And also then, for me, the other thing that helps is remembering that, like, I could be, working at Kinko's. And this is, even if I'm frustrated or not wanting to be in the studio in a particular moment, this is still, I can't imagine doing anything else. And every time I really get frustrated, that's what I step back and remember. And it totally blows my mind that I've been given this amazing gift, that I've been able to, make this my day job. And yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's great, man. Would you say there's any other resistances that you have on a daily basis, like anything that holds you back from creating your work besides the things we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's always a constant battle with distraction. For me, I've really had to learn. I like to use the term resistance. Are you've read then The War of Art, I'm assuming?
Yeah, love it.
That was actually a hugely shaping force, and as I kind of created my creative practice.
For me too, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, other forces of resistance, they can come in any form, and that's changes on a daily basis, but just, general distractions and whether that's turning off my phone or turning off my computer. I actually have the computer I use for reference material has the Wi-Fi on it is broken. It's like a 2005 MacBook. One of those old white ones that are like, they weigh more than a bowling ball. And it's amazing because like I can't do anything other than use it for work on it. And so shaping my creative day around removing distractions is really important. And so the resistances come, and, whether that's like I'm stressed about anything that pulls my head out of the work, whether that's finances or a relationship or anything, or that can just be as simple as like being bored and getting on Facebook, I mean, I feel like Facebook's actually the bane of every artist's existence because it's this unending, interesting thing to look at. And whenever I have to force myself to like not pick up, a device to look at things when I'm feeling like the work isn't going well. So shaping my creative space and saying, okay, this is a, internet free zone or whatever that is really important for my practice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Facebook is the bane of, I think every person in general's existence sometimes. And I always find myself, like, my rule is if I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed and I see a post from somebody I don't know, that's when I know it's time to turn it off. I really need to go and purge all my friends and just like, I don't need to know what, like, that girl that moved away in third grade, like what she's up to, like, today. Like, I don't need to know about her dog.
It doesn't matter. I mean, what scares me the most is that, like, I think Facebook as a company realized that they were losing everyone because people were starting to come to terms with the fact that this actually wasn't helpful. So then they started adding in all of this external content that now it's like a curated feed of all the things that distract me the most.
Right.
It's like, no, why does this exist?
With a couple advertisements thrown in the middle.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this really cool app, I'll link it in the show notes page, called Freedom, and that actually will block everything for you for a certain amount of time, which I think some people need. Like, you either need to like break your internet like you did, or you download an app like that.
I've actually like gone through periods where like I'll give my partner my password to my Facebook and say like, change this, don't give it back to me, and like get off of Facebook for a while, because like, especially if I'm preparing for a show. And recently I've been thinking about doing that again. Maybe this app would prevent her from having to deal with my bullshit for a little while. That would be helpful.
Well, I think it's like an important point though, because I think especially when you do have something like an upcoming show, or like real work that you know is going to take a piece of you out of you, like, and it's going to make you be vulnerable. That's a hard thing to do sometimes. And I think that our brains kind of look for any little distraction that we can find. And Facebook is an easy go-to. Like, it's just a double click of an app, or, just opening it up on your phone, or just clicking the latest notification, and you can just get lost for a little while and not have to think about this hard work that you have to do.
Yeah.
So it's like just like this tool that is just there for you for the sole purpose of distraction, like things that you don't need to see. So I think if you can find any way to get yourself out of it, whatever trick you have to do, if you have to give your partner your password and tell her to change it, or just whatever you have to do to get away from that, to get to that hard work, to put yourself in that hard situation, like, do it.
Absolutely.
Would you have any advice for people that maybe find themselves in a kind of life situation like you did, where you're kind of thrust into this new environment and you don't know what to do, or just like anything like where they're just, life is kind of different and they don't really know what they think about it, or how to maybe get out of it, or what they can get out of it, and to use their kind of creativity to try to understand it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm actually going to paraphrase because I'm terrible at quoting him, but Neil Gaiman has this amazing commencement speech he gave a few years back that's on YouTube to an art academy or something. And he talks about that exact same question about like, shit goes wrong in your life. What do? You make art about it. And for me, art is a way of responding to and understanding the world around me. So being thrust into a new space, making art about something is how I understand anything, whether that's a move to a new city, or whether that's, a stress in a relationship, or, even simple things on a daily basis. It's how I go about understanding things, and taking those negative or potentially negative spaces and looking at them through a creative lens and saying, okay, how can I turn this into something positive by making work about this, and trying to understand this through the process of making work, I think is one of the most amazing ways of turning a negative to a positive that I can even think of. It's something that I know my life would be a completely different space without. If I didn't have that, I would be a terrible person, I think, because I wouldn't have a way of processing experiences, good or bad. I think the creative process is something that, it doesn't matter whether you're a painter or whether you're someone who works, building websites or something. Everyone, I think, is creative. And I think using that as a tool to understand and respond to your life and your experiences is a deeply important thing that all humans have built into them.
Yeah, it's really good advice. And you're right. I think everybody does have a kind of creative outlet, and to use that when you do find yourself in those situations, not only to create stuff, not only to like put stuff out into the world, but to really figure out, what you think and where you want to go from there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I was wondering, before we let you go, could you tell us about, you have a show coming up soon?
Yeah, I do. And I'll try not to get too deep into it, because it's actually a pretty big
go deep, man.
Transition for me. The show's come up in October in Nashville at a gallery called Teeny Contemporary, and I'm really excited. I've got a big, beautiful space. It's probably the largest gallery space I've ever been able to take over, and so I've got this giant set of walls to fill up with things, and I don't think there's going to be a single portrait in the whole show.
Oh, really?
Which is pretty crazy for me. That's like been the entirety of my creative practice, has been portraiture. But over the past couple of years, I've started to find myself looking at, like we talked about earlier, my work has been about the sort of people that we overlook in society, and has been, primarily about trying to to get my viewers to look at those people and see their value, and to see who, these people as valuable members of society. But what the work I've started to realize is, from my standpoint, is lacking a little bit, where I want to add to it, is that, it'll look at somebody and say, hey, here's a person you're overlooking. It doesn't really dive into why and how people become overlooked, or why, what are the shaping societal factors behind my neighborhood, for example, becoming, the space that I found it to be. And so this show is much larger in scope, and isn't about particular subjects as much as it is about some of the larger societal factors that shaped Tulsa. I'm as I mentioned, I'm on this art fellowship in Oklahoma right now, and so I'm responding to this new place with this series of drawings that are focused on old signage on the side of the street that I've been finding, and making these drawings of these beautiful old but also completely decrepit Art Deco signs that are everywhere in this part of the country, and then pairing those with drawings from reference images that are actually from like the late 1800s and early 1900s about the larger political and sociological movements that shaped this state, whether that's the oil industry or the auto industry and Route 66. And the whole show in general is about the idea of westward movement and manifest destiny, and how that has shaped culture in the United States, and kind of looking at that from a contemporary standpoint as well as a historical standpoint, and saying, like, what are the results and what are the shaping forces that created this movement and this cultural identification as a group of people that's about, being pioneers and exploring and expanding. And it's still in its infancy. I'm kind of still shaping out, what the show is going to be, but it's very different than anything I've done before.
Well, and kind of going along with that, is there, like, do you have a voice in your head that's like, don't go to this new thing, like, don't start this new body of work, like, you've done something that's been so successful for so long? And I like how you said, like, moving to Tulsa and then responding to this new place, kind of like we were talking about before, like figuring that, like, this new, like, situation out through your art. So do you have like a voice in your head that's like, no, like, don't do this new thing, like, you're this artist that does this other thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am very aware, as a artist who's still an emerging artist, but someone who lives on my work, of the fact that, like, me making new work has the potential to completely implode all of the work I put in over the past 5 years. If this falls on its face, people know me as the guy who does the life-size portraits, and so making a step like this is a big risk. But it's also something that I've known I've had to do for a while, that I've been trying to figure out how to make happen, and honestly been kind of avoiding, because I've had this body of work that people have responded so well to, and that I also deeply resonate with and still enjoy. Trying to figure out what's next has been a question that I've been able to put off for a long time, because there's always something new. There's always a new person I want to draw, and I love that process so much that I've been able to say, okay, I'll try something new next month. This show, they expect a certain thing, so I'll just keep doing what I've been doing and, change it in little ways so that I'm still feeling like I'm, creatively growing, but I'll in general kind of keep focusing on the same body of work. And it eventually reached a point where I just had to say, you know what, like, I can't keep doing that. At a certain point, it starts to feel like it's disingenuous if I'm wanting to try something else, but only doing this because I know that it's what other people expect from me, or it's saleable, or, it's the easy thing to do. It starts to feel like it's phoning it in, and that's not why I became an artist. And so, yeah, this is a really terrifying place to be, but I've felt so creatively alive in a way that I hadn't in honestly a couple of years, because I'm doing things that I don't know what the end result is going to be, and I don't know where it's going, and I don't know what it'll look like, and I'm in this space that's like really really exciting. It's pretty fun.
That's awesome, man. And would you say it's like thinking of like what's next, or is it thinking about like what's also, like, if that makes sense, like in addition to what you've done before, like, are you kind of moved on, or are you gonna like balance both?
I kind of go one show at a time. I'll never say that I won't go back to portraiture. I love drawing people, And in some ways, this show has been really freeing because I'm not drawing people, but it's also felt like something's a little bit missing. Not having, direct, portraiture as the main focus of it. So, I'm sure at some point I'll be continuing and looking back at some of the work that I've made about people and trying to pull that into some of these other larger questions. But for this particular show, I'm ecstatic that it's totally different. So yeah, we'll see what happens after this. It feels like one step in many, in the process of trying to find something that's a little bit larger in scope than what I'd been focusing on. And it feels like it's the right first step, but I'm not quite sure what the next one is.
Very cool. Yeah, and I mean, that comes from intuition. I'm sure you will know what that next step is, but I love your story about that and about really trusting your intuition, even if it takes you a little bit longer than maybe it should, but like that voice that says, all right, it's time to move on to something else. It's, you've been doing this over and over again, or you're phoning it in. If you're getting those voices, sometimes like they're false voices. Like sometimes it's just resistance trying to get you to stop, to go on Facebook and just do something different. But sometimes like if it keeps coming in, that you just got to trust that intuition, trust your instincts, and move on to something and see how it feels. And maybe it's not right. Maybe it's not the right time, but to just try it out and to just really trust your insides.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the hardest part of that was giving myself the freedom to make mistakes, where because I had this body of work that was, well received, and I kind of had figured out the formula for working within that particular vein and speaking about that subject matter and making those pieces, I was no longer in a place where making mistakes was, a normal part of my daily process. I certainly wouldn't ever feel like every single drawing was as successful as every other drawing, but I could look at a reference photo and say, this will make a really powerful drawing, and I could know what that was going to be. And now stepping into this space where where I'm forcing myself to have the ability to make mistakes and to allow myself to make those mistakes and, learn from them and have them add to my practice has been fucking terrifying, but also like really beautiful, because the things that have come out of that have been things I would have a year ago never even considered drawing. It's something that I'm trying to figure out, in my practice. How do I continue to balance those things of, honing in and really shaping and forming something and sharpening it to make it as good as it can possibly be, but also, trying new things and turning over new stones and letting those mistakes happen that also inform my practice. So it's a balance, and I'm learning every step of the way.
Absolutely, man. It's like you said before, those two driving forces for creative people. It's one, that creative passion, like it's like really exciting to get into something new, but then that ambition and that work ethic is what's going to get you through as you do have those kinds of questions, those hiccups, those things that you're unsure of. It's kind of trusting that kind of passion's going to come back again, or that passion's going to run as a thread throughout that new thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Joel, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Oh, this is funny. I'm totally, I'm kind of a practical artist and a bit of a hard ass when it comes to it. The best advice I ever received is kind of, it's a two-edged sword. And this is the advice I received when I was graduating with a degree that wasn't an art degree, and I was talking to an art professor and saying, hey, I think I have the wrong degree. I want to be a fine artist. And she turned to me and she said, don't be an artist unless you can't not. And that was, I think, is the best advice I've ever gotten. It has two sides to it. The first one being, that if you want to be an artist, if that's something that is a shaping force in your life, it kind of happens. And that's like, sounds like some wishy-washy bullshit, but like, it's not. You will continue shaping your life in a way that, you're making decisions that bring you closer to that final goal. And it's one little tiny step at a time. And one day you'll wake up and be like, oh my God, like I'm actually an artist now. This is what I do. But also that like, on the flip side, it's not meant for everyone. It's a tough thing to do. It's something that, I don't know, I'm glad that I didn't go to art school and get an art degree, because there's a lot less financial support in the art world than, the institutions of the art world want you to think. And not to say like, don't become an artist, just that it's a tough job that is one of the hardest things that I think someone could choose to do, because there's so many more artists than there are collectors, and there are grants and there are galleries. So that advice being kind of this two-edged sword of, if you really want to do it, it's possible and you can make it happen, but it will happen if it's meant for it to happen also. That's where I sound kind of new agey, and like the artists that I always
new agey is cool.
Yeah. But that like it'll happen if you chase it long enough. You just have to find out if you are the sort of person that has the ability to chase it until you catch it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Joel, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is a blast.
Of course, man. And you can find Joel on his website, which is joeldanielphillips.com. On Instagram and Facebook, he is Joel Daniel Phillips. And you can find all the links to everything we talked about today, the Neil Gaiman speech, and his upcoming show at yourcreativepush.com/JDPhillips. Joel, thanks again, man.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Oh, big, huge thanks to Joel once again for coming on the show. It was really a thrill and really fun to kind of get him at this moment where he is making this transition in his career as he's going towards this new thing with this upcoming show, and how he's not even drawing portraits anymore. It was really cool to pick his brain about what that's like and the fears that go into that. So really fun there. But I also wanted to go back to something that Joel said earlier in the episode that was really a really cool point that he made, how a subject will portray themselves in the way that they want to be seen by the camera when you throw a camera into the situation. It made me think about, I don't know if it was Leno or I think it was Jimmy Kimmel that does this thing at Coachella where they interview the concert attendees and ask them what they think about a specific band. And everybody has an opinion. They think that this band's so cool. They love their vibe. They love their music. They just love how they dress or whatever. But all the bands that they're asking them about are fake bands that don't exist. And it's hilarious to see how people become an expert once a camera crew walks up to them and somebody asks them a question. They don't want to be like, oh, I don't know who that band is, because clearly it's important enough for somebody to be asking them what they think about them. It's a much better solution for them to just make up bullshit and to just give an opinion that doesn't even exist. It's so strange to see and so odd, but it's so telling about how when a camera is involved, you are not yourself. You are not putting your honest self out there. You don't answer like, oh, I don't know. Ask somebody else who that band is that I've never heard of before. And for you, for me, as creative people, I think our, quote, camera is our perceived audience. If we're putting our work out there, we know that other people are going to see it. There's going to be somebody on the other end of that camera. And knowing that, it gets in our head when we're creating our work, and we will pose in a certain way, so to speak, to put our best foot forward, or to put this other persona out there, this other thing that we think that our perceived audience wants to see, instead of what we actually are, who we actually are. And I know that we talked about in the episode how it's not quite a fair example to use homeless people as a comparison, the way that they don't give two fucks, because they don't give two fucks for a very good reason, because they have been through a lot, very unfairly, usually. But the closer we can get as creative people to not giving two fucks, the more honest our work will be, the more genuine we will be, and we will have a much better chance of connecting with that audience on the other end of the camera that we're not supposed to give two fucks about. On Thursday's show, we have Zan Romanoff. Zan is a talented writer. I had so much fun speaking with her, and you can find her at zanromanoff.com. That's ROMANOFF.com, or you can find her link as well as links to everything we talked about today at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/234, including a link there to Freedom, that app and website that I mentioned that will really help to stop all of your distractions. And if you actually head to the link on the show notes page, or if you go to yourcreativepush.com/freedom and you decide to buy it or subscribe to it, you will be helping out the show because I will get a little bit of kickback from that. Again, that's yourcreativepush.com/freedom. Definitely check it out. I use it. I love it. It's great. But that is all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you next time if you need the push again. I love you all, and we will see you then. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.